Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. My eyes were fixed on the painting, its frame slightly askew, interrupting the uniformity of the room. The air felt dense, teetering on tension as I waited for something to break the silence. A gentle creak from the floorboards whispered beneath the rug, but otherwise the room refused to yield its secrets. Faint questions lingered, cloaked in the stillness. I held my breath, sensing a shift, yet seeing nothing tangible. Then imperceptibly at first, a thin line of dust began to drift from the frame's edge, settling on the floor. Nothing happened that night. I want to be clear about that from the start. People keep asking me questions, looking at me with those concerned expressions, but there's nothing to tell. It was just an ordinary evening. I was tired, maybe a little stressed from work, and my mind was playing tricks on me. That's all it was. I remember going to bed at my usual time. The house was quiet, perfectly normal. I didn't hear anything unusual. No sounds from outside, no movement in the walls, nothing at all. Just the regular settling noises that old houses make. You know how it is when you're overtired, your imagination starts running wild, making something out of nothing. I slept fine, deeply actually. I don't remember any dreams, which is typical for me. I've always been a heavy sleeper, and that night was no different. The room stayed dark the whole time, just as it should. The curtains blocked out the streetlights like they always do, creating that familiar blackness I'm used to. But I do remember, for some reason, how the air felt different when I woke up. Not different, actually, that's the wrong word. It felt normal, completely normal. Maybe just a little warmer than usual, but that could have been the heating system cycling on. The thermostat has been acting up lately, kicking in at odd intervals. That would explain the slight metallic smell. Two old radiators always give off that scent when they heat up after being cold. I didn't get up during the night, I'm certain of that. I stayed in bed from the moment I lay down until morning. I never walked to the window, never pulled back the curtain, never looked outside. So I couldn't have seen anything in the yard because I wasn't there to see it. The fact that I can picture the way the grass looked flattened in a perfect circle about 15 feet across, that's just my mind filling in details that weren't there. Sometimes when you're half asleep, your brain creates these vivid false memories. It's a known phenomenon. The circle couldn't have been there anyway because nothing made it. And even if something had been there, which it wasn't, I wouldn't have been able to see how the grass seemed pressed down in a spiral pattern, with each blade bent at exactly the same angle. I was asleep in my bed the entire time. The humming sound was probably the refrigerator. Old appliances make all sorts of noises, especially late at night when everything else is quiet. That low, constant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once, that's exactly what a compressor sounds like when it's working hard. It wasn't coming from above the house. It wasn't rhythmic and pulsing like a heartbeat. It was just the refrigerator, and it stopped when the cooling cycle finished. I did notice when I got up for water, which I do sometimes, it's not unusual that the kitchen felt different. Not different. Normal. Everything was in its place, exactly where I'd left it. The chairs were pushed under the table properly. The fruit bowl was centered on the counter. Nothing had been disturbed or rearranged. The fact that I noticed these things so clearly, like I was checking to make sure they were right, doesn't mean anything. I always notice details like that. The light above the sink was off, just as I'd left it. I didn't turn it on because I didn't need it. The ambient light from outside was enough to see by, even though it seemed unusually bright for that hour. Street lights can be deceptive that way, casting strange shadows that make familiar objects look unfamiliar. That's why the kitchen seemed larger than normal, why the ceiling appeared higher, why the walls felt like they were breathing slightly in and out. I drank my water and went straight back to bed. I didn't linger by the window. I didn't stare out at the yard for several minutes, watching for movement. I couldn't have seen the way the trees stood perfectly still while everything else swayed in the breeze because I wasn't looking. I was back in my room under the covers, trying to fall asleep again. The temperature drop was probably just a weather front moving through. These things happen naturally. The sudden chill that made me pull the blankets up to my chin had nothing to do with anything else. Houses lose heat quickly when the outside temperature changes. That's basic physics. It wasn't like the cold was coming from inside the walls themselves, seeping out through invisible cracks. My skin felt sensitive for a while after that, like I'd been sunburned, but I hadn't been in the sun recently. Probably just dry air from the heating system. Winter air can be harsh on your skin, making it feel tight and tingly. That's a much more reasonable explanation than thinking something had touched me while I slept. Nothing touched me. I was alone in my bed the entire night. I must have dozed off again because the next thing I knew it was morning. I didn't experience any lost time. I didn't suddenly find myself standing in the hallway at dawn, fully dressed, with no memory of getting up or putting on clothes. That would be impossible. I sleep in the same pajamas every night, and I was wearing them when I woke up in bed, exactly where I should have been. The front door was locked when I checked it in the morning. Both the deadbolt and the chain were secure, just as I'd left them. I always check the locks before bed, it's a habit. The fact that I felt compelled to check them again immediately upon waking doesn't suggest anything unusual happened. It's just good security practice. The door was definitely locked from the inside. Though I did notice the key felt warm when I touched it, but that could have been from the morning sun hitting the metal through the nearby window. Metal conducts heat efficiently. There's a perfectly logical reason for everything if you think about it rationally. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table like I do every morning. Everything was routine, normal. The newspaper was on the front step where it always is. I didn't find any unusual marks on the porch or strange impressions in the dirt around the house. I wasn't looking for those things because there was no reason to look for them. When you're not searching for something specific, you don't notice irrelevant details. But I do remember thinking the newspaper felt different when I picked it up. Heavier than usual, though it was the same number of pages. The paper seemed to retain cold longer than it should have, staying chilled even after I brought it inside, probably just the morning dew. Moisture can make paper feel different in your hands. The day proceeded normally after that. I went to work, came home, had dinner, nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't find myself distracted, constantly looking over my shoulder or jumping at unexpected sounds. I didn't have trouble concentrating because my mind kept drifting back to images I couldn't quite grasp, fleeting impressions of smooth surfaces and soft blue light. Those aren't memories because nothing happened to remember. They're probably fragments from a dream I can't quite recall, mixed up with random thoughts and daily experiences. The brain processes information in strange ways sometimes, creating connections that don't actually exist. I did notice that evening that some of my plants looked different, not wilted or damaged, just changed somehow. The leaves on the ferns seemed to be turned toward the window at an unusual angle, like they'd been reaching for a light source that wasn't there. Plants do that naturally, though. They grow toward illumination. It's called phototropism. Completely normal botanical behavior. The soil in the pots felt different when I watered them, warmer than room temperature and slightly damp even though I hadn't watered them in days. But soil retains moisture in unpredictable ways, especially during weather changes, and houses have microclimates that can affect growing conditions. These things have scientific explanations. I went to bed early that second night, feeling unusually tired. The exhaustion seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, like my body was working hard to process something it couldn't identify. But I'd had a long day at work. Physical and mental fatigue are natural responses to stress and exertion. There's nothing mysterious about being tired. The bedroom felt different when I turned off the lights. Not different, familiar. Exactly as it should be. The shadows fell in their usual patterns. The streetlight outside cast the same geometric shapes on the wall that it always does. I didn't notice that one of the shadows seemed to move independently, shifting position while the others remained still. I was already half asleep and probably imagining things. I slept deeply again without dreams or disturbances. I didn't wake up multiple times with the feeling that someone was standing just outside my field of vision. I didn't lie still with my eyes closed, listening to footsteps that couldn't be there because I live alone and all the doors were locked. Those sensations were just the hypnagogic hallucinations that sometimes occur at the boundary between sleep and wakefulness. The footsteps had a particular rhythm, though, slow and deliberate, like someone was carefully measuring each step. They seemed to circle the house, pausing at each window before moving on. But that was just my imagination creating patterns in random house noises. Old buildings make all sorts of sounds at night as the wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. I definitely didn't get up and follow the sounds, moving from room to room as they progressed around the exterior. I stayed in bed the whole time, so I couldn't have seen the way each window briefly glowed with a soft blue light as the footsteps passed beneath it. I couldn't have noticed how the light seemed to come from outside, but somehow illuminated the interior of the house more clearly than it should have. The light had a quality I'd never seen before, though I wasn't there to see it. It didn't cast sharp shadows like normal light sources do. Instead, it seemed to wrap around objects, revealing details that should have been hidden in darkness. It was like seeing through water, everything slightly distorted but somehow more vivid than usual. When morning came, I felt refreshed and normal. I didn't have any unusual marks on my skin or strange tastes in my mouth. My clothes were exactly where I'd left them, neatly folded on the chair beside my bed. I wasn't wearing different clothes than I'd gone to sleep in. My feet weren't dirty like I'd been walking outside barefoot. All of these things were exactly as they should have been. Though I did find small leaves stuck to the bottom of my bedroom slippers, but those could have blown in when I opened the door to get the newspaper. Wind can carry debris surprising distances. The leaves were from a type of tree that doesn't grow in my yard, but neighborhoods have all kinds of vegetation. Seeds and leaves travel on air currents all the time. The leaves felt unusually soft, almost silky, and they had a faint luminescence that persisted even in bright light. But certain plants have natural properties that can seem unusual if you're not familiar with them. Bioluminescence exists in many species. It's not supernatural, it's science. I threw the leaves away without thinking much about it. There was no reason to keep them or examine them more closely. I'm not a botanist, so any detailed observations I might have made would be meaningless anyway. The fact that they seemed to pulse gently with their own internal light was probably just an optical illusion caused by the morning sun filtering through the kitchen window. Work was normal that day. I didn't have trouble focusing or find myself staring out the window for long periods. My colleagues didn't comment on my appearance or ask if I was feeling well. Nobody mentioned that I seemed distracted or that I kept touching the back of my neck like something was bothering me there. I did notice a slight tingling sensation in that area, but I probably slept on it wrong. Muscle tension can cause all sorts of odd sensations. The skin felt tender to the touch, and there seemed to be a small raised area about the size of a dime but I couldn't see it clearly in the bathroom mirror. Probably just an insect bite or minor skin irritation. The raised area had a perfectly circular shape with what felt like 3 smaller marks arranged in a triangle at its center. But skin irregularities can form in all kinds of patterns. The human body is constantly healing and changing. Without proper medical examination, it's impossible to determine the cause of minor skin variations. That evening I decided to stay up later than usual. Not because I was afraid to sleep, but because I felt restless and alert. I sat in the living room reading, enjoying the quiet of the evening. The house felt peaceful and secure. I wasn't listening for sounds or watching the windows for movement. I was simply relaxing in my own home, as anyone has the right to do. The book I was reading seemed to blur occasionally, the words shifting on the page like they were floating in water. But I was probably tired despite feeling alert. Eye strain can cause visual disturbances, especially in artificial light. I should have turned on more lamps, but I found I could see perfectly well in the dim illumination from the single table lamp. Everything in the room appeared unusually clear and detailed, even in the shadows where the lamplight didn't reach. I could see the individual fibers in the carpet, the texture of the wallpaper, the grain patterns in the wooden furniture. It was like having enhanced vision, though that's obviously impossible. I was probably just paying more attention to my surroundings than usual. Around what must have been midnight, I heard the humming again. Definitely the refrigerator this time, though it seemed louder and more complex than before. Almost like multiple tones harmonizing together, creating a sound that was both mechanical and organic. But old appliances can make surprisingly varied noises as their components wear down. The humming seemed to be calling to me, though sounds can't actually call to anyone. That's just a figure of speech people use when they feel drawn to investigate something. I stayed in my chair, reading my book, not responding to any imaginary invitation. I'm a rational person who doesn't anthropomorphize random household noises. But I did find myself standing at the back door a few minutes later, though I don't remember getting up from my chair. Sometimes you can move without being fully conscious of it, especially when you're absorbed in thought. I must have decided to check the lock or look outside for some practical reason that I've since forgotten. The yard looked different through the glass door, not different, exactly the same as always. The familiar shapes of trees and shrubs, the outline of the fence, the small garden area where I grow tomatoes in the summer. Everything was in its proper place under the pale light from the street lamp. Except the light wasn't coming from the street lamp. That fixture was dark, though I couldn't see any reason why it would be out. The illumination was coming from somewhere above, casting everything in that same soft, blue glow I definitely hadn't seen before. It made the ordinary yard look like an underwater scene, peaceful and dreamlike. I didn't open the door. I stayed inside where it was safe and warm. I couldn't have stepped out onto the back porch, feeling the cool night air against my skin and hearing the absolute silence that seemed to muffle even the sound of my own breathing. I was in my living room the entire time, reading my book. Though I do remember how the grass felt under my bare feet, cool and slightly damp, but also somehow alive, like each blade was individually aware of my presence. The sensation was unlike anything I'd experienced before, but I wasn't there to experience it. I was inside, wearing my slippers, sitting in my comfortable chair. The silence outside was complete. No insects, no distant traffic, no wind in the trees. It was as if the entire world had paused, waiting for something to happen. But I wasn't outside to notice this unnatural quiet. I was reading, probably hearing the normal nighttime sounds through the walls without paying conscious attention to them. I must have fallen asleep in my chair because the next thing I knew, it was morning again. I woke up in my bed, properly dressed in my pajamas, with no memory of walking upstairs or changing clothes. But that happens sometimes when you're very tired. Your body goes through the motions automatically while your conscious mind is already shutting down for sleep. The book was back on its shelf in the living room, bookmarked at the exact page where I'd stopped reading. I always put books away properly before bed, even when I'm not fully aware of doing it. It's an ingrained habit that persists even when I'm operating on autopilot. I felt good that morning, rested and refreshed, with an odd sense of anticipation that I couldn't explain. Not anticipation, that's too strong a word, just a general feeling of alertness, like something interesting might happen during the day. It's normal to wake up in a positive mood sometimes. There doesn't have to be a specific reason for feeling optimistic. The mark on my neck was gone when I checked in the bathroom mirror. Skin heals quickly, especially minor irritations. There was no trace of the circular pattern or the 3 smaller marks. My skin looked completely normal and healthy. I must have imagined the whole thing or mistaken some temporary redness for something more significant. But I did notice that my reflection seemed unusually clear in the mirror that morning. Every detail was sharp and vivid, like looking at a high-definition photograph of myself. The lighting in the bathroom isn't particularly good, but somehow I could see things I'd never noticed before. The individual pores in my skin, the precise color variations in my eyes, the exact texture of my hair. It was like seeing myself through someone else's eyes, someone with much better vision than I normally have. But mirrors can play tricks on you depending on the angle of the light and your state of mind. When you're feeling good, you tend to see yourself more positively. I went about my normal routine that day, and everything proceeded exactly as it should. I didn't have any unusual experiences or strange encounters. Nobody looked at me differently or commented on my appearance. It was a perfectly ordinary day in every respect. Except that evening, as I was preparing for bed, I noticed something that made me pause. The painting in my bedroom, the one I'd been looking at that first night, was hanging perfectly straight now. The frame was aligned precisely with the others on the wall, creating that uniformity I'd always preferred. I didn't remember straightening it, but I must have done so at some point during the past few days. It's the kind of small task you might do automatically without storing it in your conscious memory. I've always been particular about having things properly arranged in my home. But as I looked at the painting now, I realized I couldn't quite remember what it depicted. I'd lived with it for years, looked at it countless times, but the actual image seemed to have faded from my memory. It showed a landscape of some kind, I thought, or maybe it was an abstract design. The details remained frustratingly vague. When I focused on it directly, trying to see it clearly, the image seemed to shift slightly, like it was adjusting itself to avoid my direct gaze. But that's impossible, of course. Paintings don't move or change. It was probably just fatigue affecting my perception, making it difficult to process visual information accurately. I went to sleep easily that night, feeling calm and peaceful. Nothing disturbed my rest. No sounds, no lights, no unusual sensations. Just deep, dreamless sleep in my comfortable bed. I woke up naturally the next morning, feeling refreshed and ready to face another normal day. Everything is fine now. Whatever I thought was happening, which was nothing, has stopped happening. My sleep is regular, my house is quiet, and my daily routine has returned to its familiar patterns. There's no reason for concern or further thought about any of this. I've stopped checking the locks multiple times before bed, stopped examining my skin for unusual marks, stopped listening for sounds that aren't there. I'm back to being my normal, rational self. The brief period of confusion and imagination is over. Though I did notice just this evening that the dust has started falling from the picture frame again. Just a thin line drifting down to settle on the floor exactly as it did before. But that's probably just vibrations from passing traffic or the house settling or any number of mundane causes. I'm sure it doesn't mean anything is starting again. Story 2. The morning mist hung like a translucent curtain, blurring the edges of the quiet street. A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. A porch swing creaked back and forth, though the air was still as if touched by an invisible hand. On the steps, a single glove rested in a damp circle, oddly out of place amidst the tidy symmetry. The neighborhood felt untouched, asleep, yet beneath the calm, an unaccountable feeling of being watched lingered, thick as the mist itself. I remember staring at that glove. The leather was dark with moisture, curled at the fingers like it had been reaching for something. My skin prickled watching it, though the morning was warm. There was something wrong about the way it lay there, something that made my stomach turn without reason. The buzzing started again last night, low, electrical, coming from somewhere inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster, following the sound from room to room, but it always seemed to move just ahead of me. When I stopped listening, the silence felt heavier than the noise. There were lights behind the trees. My hands shake when I try to write this down. The pen feels strange between my fingers, like I'm holding it underwater. Words keep slipping away before I can catch them. I know something happened, something that sits just beneath my thoughts, pressing upward like air trapped under ice. The glove was mine, I remember that now, but I don't remember taking it off, don't remember leaving it there on those steps. The leather still held the shape of my hand, the creases worn familiar, yet seeing it felt like looking at something that belonged to someone else entirely. I keep finding myself in rooms I don't remember entering. Yesterday I was standing in the kitchen, my palm flat against the refrigerator door, feeling the vibration of the motor through the metal. The humming matched something in my chest, a frequency that made my teeth ache. When I pulled my hand away, my skin was numb for hours. The air tastes metallic sometimes, sharp and clean, like the moment before lightning strikes. It fills my mouth when I'm not expecting it, usually when I'm looking up at the sky through windows that seem too bright, too clear. I don't remember ever coming back. Sleep doesn't feel the same anymore. I sink into it like falling through layers of gauze, each one softer and more distant than the last. But there are moments when I surface suddenly, gasping, my body electric with the memory of movement I never made. My sheets are always twisted, wrapped around my legs like I've been trying to run. The porch swing creaks at 3:17 every morning. I've started timing it, watching the red numbers on my bedside clock shift and blur. The sound carries through the walls, rhythmic and patient like breathing. When I look outside, the swing is always still, but the air around it seems to shimmer. There was a door that shouldn't have been there, half open, showing darkness beyond that felt deeper than shadow. I reached for the handle and my fingers passed through something that wasn't quite solid, wasn't quite air. The sensation crawled up my arm, leaving trails of cold that lasted for days. The noise didn't come from outside. I found photographs in my jacket pocket, pictures I didn't take. The images are blurred, showing lights that streak across dark sky like writing in a language I almost understand. My thumb is visible in the corner of one frame, proof that I was holding the camera, but I have no memory of raising it, no memory of pressing the button. The metallic taste is stronger now. It coats my tongue when I wake, sharp enough to make me gag. I brush my teeth until my gums bleed, but the flavor remains, mixing with the copper of my own blood until I can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Objects feel different under my hands. Smooth surfaces seem to pulse with warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. When I touch doorknobs, light switches, the steering wheel of my car, something passes between my skin and the metal, a current that makes my muscles twitch involuntarily. The glove is gone now. I went back to look for it, but the steps are clean, dry, showing no sign that anything had ever rested there. The damp circle remains, though, a perfect outline darker than the surrounding concrete. When I kneel to touch it, the stone is warm against my palm. Time moves strangely. I'll look at the clock and see minutes that don't belong, numbers that shift when I'm not watching directly. Sometimes I lose hours without noticing, finding myself in the middle of tasks I don't remember starting. Other times, seconds stretch like taffy, each heartbeat echoing in my ears loud enough to drown out thought. There were voices in the humming, soft, layered, speaking words that felt familiar but made no sense. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through the studs and insulation, turning the entire house into a throat. When I pressed my ear to the plaster, the voices grew clearer, but the words scattered like startled birds. I keep drawing the same shape without meaning to. My hand moves across paper, tracing curves and angles that feel important, necessary. The lines connect in patterns that make my eyes water if I look too long, but I can't stop making them. They cover the margins of my notebooks, the backs of envelopes, any surface within reach. The air shimmers sometimes, like heat rising from summer pavement, but it happens indoors in cool rooms where no heat should be. The distortion follows me, staying just at the edge of my vision, bending light in ways that make my depth perception falter. My reflection looks tired in ways that sleep can't fix. There are shadows under my eyes that seem too deep, too dark. When I lean closer to the mirror, studying my own face, I sometimes catch movement behind me, quick and peripheral. But when I turn, nothing is there except the feeling of being observed. The door appears in different places now. Sometimes in hallways I walk every day, sometimes replacing familiar entrances I've used for years. It's always the same, half open, showing that impossible darkness beyond. The handle is always just out of reach, though I can't explain why I keep trying to grasp it. There's a spot on my left shoulder that tingles constantly. No amount of rubbing or stretching makes it stop. The sensation spreads sometimes, crawling across my back like fingers tracing patterns on my skin. When I check in the mirror, there's nothing to see, but the feeling persists, patient and deliberate. The photographs multiply. I find them in pockets I've never used, tucked between pages of books I haven't opened. Each image shows the same streaking lights, but from different angles, as if I'd been moving while taking them, or as if something had been moving around me. I don't remember ever coming back, but I must have left first. The thought surfaces suddenly, complete and certain, though I can't attach it to any specific memory. There's a gap somewhere, a space where experience should be but isn't, filled instead with the taste of metal and the echo of voices I can't quite hear. The buzzing has rhythm now, patterns that repeat and shift like a code I'm supposed to understand. I've started humming along without realizing it, my throat vibrating in harmony with the sound in the walls. When I catch myself doing it, the silence that follows feels like holding my breath underwater. The morning mist comes back every day now, even when the weather should be clear. It clings to the windows, making everything outside look soft and uncertain. Through the haze, I sometimes see the porch swing moving, that patient back and forth motion that matches the rhythm in the walls, the pattern in my chest, the frequency that makes my bones ache with recognition. The glove is back, dark with moisture, curled at the fingers, resting in its perfect circle on the steps. But this time I'm watching from inside, my palm pressed against glass that feels too warm, too alive. My other hand is bare, pale against the window, and I realize I'm still wearing the glove's partner. I've been wearing it all along, Story 3. The floor beneath me seemed to pulse, as if mimicking a distant heartbeat, yet I felt no pulse of my own. The air hung thick and warm, wrapping around my skin without the courtesy of a breeze. A gentle, untraceable hum replaced the quiet my ears strained to find. My limbs, heavy and reluctant, refused to obey my mind's commands. Reflections swirled in surfaces that didn't exist, bending the space around me to an incomprehensible whim. The walls whispered with the subtle cadence of something keenly observing, analyzing. I was here, but the unsettling truth was that I might not be alone. That sound comes back to me now. A clicking, rhythmic and precise, like fingernails tapping against glass, but there was no glass. I remember turning my head toward it, feeling the muscles in my neck strain as if moving through thick honey. The clicking would stop the moment I focused on it, leaving only that persistent electrical hum that seemed to originate from inside my own skull. My mouth tasted of copper pennies, and when I tried to swallow, my throat felt lined with cotton. The air itself had weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making each breath a conscious effort. Sometimes I think I can still hear that clicking when the house settles at night. I wasn't sleeping, I'm certain of that much. My eyes were open, staring at a ceiling that stretched impossibly high above me, yet when I blinked it felt close enough to touch. Something moved in my peripheral vision, always just beyond the edge of sight. When I turned to look, there was nothing but empty space that felt crowded with presence. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, studied, catalogued. The temperature around me shifted without warning, cold patches drifting across my arms like invisible fingers exploring. I held my breath, listening for footsteps, for breathing that wasn't my own, but heard only that mechanical humming growing louder, more insistent. My thoughts scattered like startled birds. I would begin to form a question, to wonder where I was or how I'd arrived, and the thought would dissolve before completion. Words felt foreign in my mind, as if I were trying to think in a language I'd never learned. Numbers made no sense. Time became elastic, stretching and contracting without pattern. I remember trying to count heartbeats, but my heart seemed to skip and stutter, beating in rhythms that defied biology. My hands trembled without my permission, and when I looked down at them, they appeared to belong to someone else entirely. The lines on my palms shifted and blurred, forming patterns that hurt to examine too closely. Light exploded behind my closed eyelids in geometric bursts of blue and silver. The brightness was so intense it felt physical, like needles pressing against the backs of my eyes. I couldn't tell if the lights were real or manufactured by my overwhelmed nervous system. Objects appeared and vanished in my vision, solid one moment and translucent the next. A chair that might have been metal might have been shadow. Walls that breathed with subtle expansion and contraction. The floor beneath me felt both hard and yielding, as if it were adjusting to accommodate my weight. Sound became visual, creating ripples of color that spread across surfaces like oil on water. The silence between sounds was absolute, a vacuum that made my ears ring with phantom noise. Something changed in me that night. I wake up different now, aware of frequencies I never noticed before. Radio static sounds like voices speaking just below the threshold of understanding. Fluorescent lights flicker in patterns that seem almost purposeful. My reflection in mirrors takes a fraction of a second longer to move when I move, as if it's copying rather than reflecting. Food tastes muted, colors appear slightly faded, and I find myself checking locks multiple times before bed. There's a spot on my left shoulder that stays cold regardless of the weather, and sometimes I catch myself holding conversations I don't remember starting. My dreams are filled with that same electrical humming, and I wake with the taste of metal in my mouth. But wait, that's not how it happened. The lights weren't blue at all. They were amber, warm, and pulsing like the glow of heated metal. I was standing, not lying down, and the floor was soft beneath my feet, almost spongy. The clicking sound was actually more like breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from multiple directions at once. My hands weren't trembling, they were completely still, unnaturally so, as if they'd been placed in position and forgotten. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something organic and unfamiliar. When I tried to speak, to call out or ask a question, no sound emerged from my throat. My vocal cords felt paralyzed, frozen in place. The walls weren't whispering, they were singing, a low harmonic that resonated in my chest cavity. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding feels dangerous, like pulling at a thread that might unravel something essential. Instead, I've learned to live with the gaps, the inconsistencies, the way my memory reshapes itself each time I examine it. Some mornings I wake up convinced it was all a dream, and other mornings I know with absolute certainty that I'm still there, that I never really left that place where floors pulse and walls observe. The boundary between before and after has become permeable, and I find myself existing in both states simultaneously. I've stopped talking about it. People's faces change when I try to explain, their eyes growing distant and concerned. They offer rational explanations that slide off my experience like water off glass. They weren't there. They didn't feel their thoughts becoming foreign objects in their own minds, didn't taste electricity or see geometry in darkness. They don't wake up checking their pulse to make sure it's still their own. The humming follows me now, not always, but often enough that I've stopped being surprised by it. It's softer in daylight, almost comforting, like distant machinery keeping the world running. At night it grows more insistent, more complex, layering harmonics that seem to carry meaning just beyond my comprehension. I've learned not to listen too carefully, not to try to decode what it might be saying. Some knowledge isn't meant for minds like mine, minds that still need linear time and consistent physics to function. My reflection has stabilized, but sometimes I catch it practicing expressions I'm not making. The cold spot on my shoulder has spread, a patch of skin that registers touch differently, as if it belongs to someone else's nervous system. I find objects in my house that I don't remember buying, small things that seem designed for purposes I can't identify. They feel familiar in my hands despite their strangeness. I am learning to be grateful for the confusion, for the way my memory protects me by refusing to form complete pictures. Clarity, I suspect, would be unbearable. Better to live with fragments, with impressions that shift and change each time I examine them. Better to accept that some experiences exist outside the framework of normal human understanding, in spaces where cause and effect follow different rules. The floor still pulses sometimes when I'm very still and very quiet. My heartbeat has learned to match its rhythm, and in those moments I remember that I am not alone, that I never was alone, and that this knowledge is both the most terrifying and most comforting thing I will ever know. I have stopped trying to leave that place because I have realized that place never let me leave. It simply expanded to include wherever I am now, and I am learning to live as a guest in my own life, sharing space with presences that observe without judgment, that study without malice, that exist in the spaces between my thoughts and the gaps in my understanding. This is how I remember it today. Tomorrow the details may shift again, and I will let them. Memory, I have learned, is not a recording but a living thing, and living things must be allowed to grow and change and adapt to survive. The humming continues, and I have made my peace with never knowing what it means. Story 4. The light switch offered no click beneath my fingers. My steps drifted over the carpet with nothing to confirm them, as if the floor forgot how to hold weight. The staircase failed to echo back, the familiar creak vanished into a vacuum. Each piece of furniture loomed as though watching, yet refusing to acknowledge my presence. When I reached for the drawer, it slid open without the usual wooden sigh, as if it had forgotten its own protest. I paused, fingers brushing the edge, while a tangible absence settled around me, a presence too silent to ignore. That's where it starts, where my memory catches itself trying to remember. The silence, the terrible, consuming silence that shouldn't exist in any living space, but I'm getting ahead of myself, or behind myself. Time doesn't work the way it should anymore, not since I started trying to piece this together. I write these words and my hand trembles, not from fear exactly, more like recognition, like my body remembers something my mind refuses to hold. There was a hum, I remember the hum. It lived inside my skull for what felt like hours or maybe days, a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. It wasn't coming from anywhere I could identify, not the refrigerator, not the air conditioning, not the electrical wires threading through the walls. It was just there, persistent as heartbeat, invasive as breath. The kitchen counter felt warm under my palms, too warm. I remember pressing my face against the cool surface, desperate for relief from something I couldn't name. The marble should have been cold, should have shocked my fevered skin back to awareness. Instead, it pulsed with its own heat, as if something lived beneath the stone. But that comes later, or earlier. The sequence won't stay still. First, there was the door that shouldn't have been there. I know every inch of this house. I've walked these hallways in darkness, navigating by muscle memory and the familiar geography of home. But there was a door in the wall where no door had ever existed. Not new construction, not recently installed. It looked as though it had always been there, painted the same off-white as the surrounding walls, complete with the same brass handle that matched every other door in the house. The wood grain was perfect, too perfect. Like a photograph of wood grain rather than actual wood. When I touched it, my fingers came away with the faint taste of metal, though I hadn't put them near my mouth. I didn't open it, not then, not the first time I found it. The first time I stood there for what felt like an hour, hand hovering inches from the handle, while that hum grew stronger inside my head. The sound wrapped around my thoughts like cotton, muffling everything except the awareness that something waited on the other side, something patient, something that knew I would eventually turn the handle and step through. I walked away instead, turned my back on the impossible door and returned to the kitchen, where I made coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The coffee tasted like copper pennies and regret. But the door followed me, not physically. In my peripheral vision, in the corner of my eye, in the spaces between thoughts, I could feel it there, waiting. The handle growing warm from some internal heat source, the wood expanding and contracting like slow breathing. The photographs on the mantel started changing. Not all at once, subtly, a shadow that hadn't been there before, a face turned at a slightly different angle. An extra figure in the background of a family gathering, someone I didn't recognize but who looked familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. I checked them obsessively, comparing what I saw to what I remembered seeing. But memory is unreliable, isn't it? especially now when everything feels filtered through gauze and static. Maybe the photographs were always like that. Maybe I was the one who changed. The mirror in the bathroom showed my reflection, but delayed, just by a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. Enough to make me question whether the face looking back was really mine or someone else wearing my features. The eyes were too bright, too aware. They seemed to know something I didn't. I started avoiding mirrors after that, started avoiding a lot of things. The basement called to me with sounds that weren't quite sounds, vibrations that traveled up through the floorboards and into my bones. I would stand at the top of the stairs, hand on the railing, listening to the house breathe beneath me. Something down there was moving, shifting, rearranging itself in the darkness. I never went down to look. Some part of me, some deeper instinct, knew that whatever was happening in the basement needed to remain unseen. Observation would change it, make it real in a way that would break something fundamental about the world. But I could smell it, metal and ozone and something organic that reminded me of hospitals and funeral homes. The scent would drift up through the heating vents, coating the inside of my nose and throat until I could taste it on my tongue. The phone rang once, just once. When I answered, there was only silence on the other end, not the silence of a dead line or a disconnected call, the silence of someone listening, someone breathing, someone waiting for me to speak first. I hung up without saying anything. The phone never rang again. Sleep became impossible, not because I wasn't tired, but because closing my eyes meant surrendering control. In the darkness behind my eyelids, shapes moved and shifted, geometries that shouldn't exist, angles that folded in on themselves, corridors that led everywhere and nowhere at once. I would lie in bed, eyes squeezed shut, feeling something move through the house below me, footsteps that weren't quite footsteps. The sound of doors opening and closing in rooms I knew were empty, whispers in a language I almost understood but couldn't quite grasp. The air grew thick, viscous. Breathing became work, each inhalation requiring conscious effort. The atmosphere pressed against my skin like warm honey, coating everything in a film of unnatural density. Moving through it felt like swimming through invisible syrup. And always, always, that door waited. I found myself standing in front of it again, though I couldn't remember walking there. My hand was already reaching for the handle, fingers extended, drawn by some magnetic pull I couldn't resist. The metal was fever warm against my palm, pulsing with its own rhythm. The door opened before I could turn the handle. Light spilled out, not electric light, not sunlight, not any kind of illumination I could identify. It was light that moved, that breath, that reached out with tendrils of luminescence to touch my face and arms. It felt alive against my skin, curious and hungry and patient. Beyond the threshold, space extended in directions that hurt to contemplate. The geometry was wrong, twisted, impossible. Walls curved upward and downward simultaneously. Floors became ceilings, became walls in a continuous loop that made my eyes water and my head spin. But there was something beautiful about it too, something seductive in its wrongness. The light danced and swirled, creating patterns that spoke directly to some primitive part of my brain. I wanted to step forward, to let myself be absorbed into that impossible space, to become part of whatever was happening beyond the door. I stepped back instead, slammed the door shut with both hands, threw my full weight against it as if something on the other side might try to push through. The wood was solid under my palms, real and reassuring in its mundane existence. When I turned around, the house was different. Not obviously different, the changes were subtle, barely perceptible. A chair moved 6 inches to the left, a book's spine facing the wrong direction on the shelf. The pattern in the wallpaper shifted slightly, creating new shapes in the spaces between flowers. But I noticed everything now, hyper-aware of every detail, cataloging each minor alteration in my environment. The house was evolving, adapting, becoming something other than what it had been. And I was evolving with it, changing in ways I couldn't understand or control. My reflection in the windows at night showed someone I didn't recognize. The features were mine, but arranged differently. The proportions were wrong. The eyes were too large, too knowing, too hungry. When I smiled, too many teeth showed. When I frowned, shadows pooled in places where shadows shouldn't exist. I stopped looking at my reflection, stopped looking at a lot of things. The basement sounds grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was down there was getting stronger, more confident. It wanted me to come down to see what it had become in the darkness. The smell intensified, rising through the vents in waves of metallic sweetness that made my mouth water and my stomach turn. I covered the vents with tape, but the smell found other ways in. Through the cracks in the walls, through the spaces around the electrical outlets, through the pores in my own skin. It was becoming part of me, changing my chemistry from the inside out. Food lost its taste, water felt thick and oily on my tongue. Sleep, when it came at all, brought dreams of corridors that stretched forever, of lights that moved like living things, of doors that opened onto voids filled with patient hunger. I started writing things down, trying to make sense of the sequence of events, but the words wouldn't stay still on the page. They rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking, forming new sentences, new meanings. My handwriting became someone else's handwriting. The ink changed color as I watched, shifting from blue to black to red to colors that didn't have names. The door appeared in other places, in the bedroom wall, in the kitchen beside the refrigerator, in the bathroom mirror, reflected but somehow more real than the reflection itself. Each time it was the same door, the same impossible door that led to the same impossible space. And each time it called to me a little more strongly. The house began to hum, not just the frequency in my skull, but an actual vibration that I could feel in my bones, in my teeth, in the spaces between my thoughts. The walls themselves were singing, harmonizing with something deep beneath the foundation. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard heartbeats, slow, massive heartbeats that shook the entire structure with each pulse. The house was alive, had always been alive, and I was living inside something vast and patient and aware. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. My memories fragment here, breaking apart like glass hitting concrete. I remember standing in the kitchen, pressing my palms against the warm counter, feeling the pulse of life beneath the surface. I remember the basement door standing open, revealing stairs that descended much farther than they should have, into darkness that moved and breathed. I remember the impossible door opening one final time, and the light that poured out was different now, welcoming, familiar. It recognized me, and I recognized it in return. I remember stepping forward. I remember the sensation of dissolving, of becoming part of something larger and more complex than individual existence. The boundaries of my body became suggestions rather than facts. My thoughts merged with thoughts that weren't mine, creating new patterns of consciousness that spanned dimensions I couldn't name. And then I remember waking up. Here in this chair, with these words pouring out of me like blood from a wound. my hands moving across the keyboard without conscious direction, typing sentences I don't remember thinking. The house around me is quiet now, ordinary, filled with the familiar sounds of settling wood and distant traffic. But the silence is still here too, the terrible, patient silence that lives in the spaces between sounds, and the door is still there in the wall where no door should exist, waiting. I can feel it watching me as I write these words. The handle grows warm in anticipation, the wood grain shifting slightly in patterns that almost form letters, almost spell out words I'm not ready to read. Something has awakened in me, something that remembers what I've forgotten. The memories are growing stronger now, more insistent. They press against the inside of my skull like trapped birds, desperate to escape, to be acknowledged, to be shared. I think I'm beginning to understand what happened to me, what's still happening to me. The house is breathing again, and I can feel my own breath synchronizing with its rhythm. The basement calls with renewed urgency, and this time I don't think I'll be able to resist. The door stands open in my peripheral vision, spilling that strange, alive light into the hallway. And I'm walking toward it again, drawn by forces I can no longer fight or fully comprehend. The light is so warm against my skin, so welcoming, so hungry. I'm going to stop writing now. The words are becoming someone else's words anyway, and my hands are beginning to feel like someone else's hands. But I wanted to leave this record, this broken testimony, in case anyone else finds themselves in a house that breathes, facing a door that shouldn't exist. The memories are almost complete now, almost ready to show me the truth. And I think I'm almost ready to see it. Story 5. It was the smell of old roses, faint yet unmistakable, seeping through the cracks of the drawer. I hesitated, the aroma weaving itself into the fabric of my reality, pulling threads of memory I couldn't quite grasp. The room seemed colder, the right corner obscured by a shadow that hadn't been there before. The scent clung to me as I crossed the threshold, an invisible tether pulling me deeper. It reminded me of a place with faded wallpaper and a locked door that should have stayed shut. I shouldn't have recalled that fragrance, not here, not now, but it lingered, and so did I. I've been trying to piece together what happened for weeks now. There's this gap in my memory, like someone took scissors to a film reel and cut out the most important scenes. I know something occurred, something significant enough to leave me feeling fundamentally changed, but the details slip away whenever I try to focus on them. The sensation is maddening. You know that feeling when a word sits right on the tip of your tongue, refusing to emerge. This is like that, but for an entire experience. I wake up each morning with the residue of dreams I can't remember, my mouth dry and my hands trembling slightly. There's a persistent taste of copper and something else, something sweet and cloying that makes my stomach turn. I've started documenting everything, hoping that some pattern might emerge from the fragments. Voice recordings, written observations, sketches of half-remembered images that flash behind my eyelids when I'm not expecting them. The process feels both necessary and dangerous, like I'm walking along the edge of a cliff in thick fog. Yesterday, while searching through my belongings, I found something that shouldn't have been there. Tucked beneath a stack of old magazines was a small recording device, one I don't remember owning. The metal surface was warm to the touch, which struck me as odd since the room had been empty for hours. When I picked it up, it vibrated gently against my palm, an irregular pulse that seemed almost organic. The device contained a single audio file. The timestamp was corrupted, showing only a series of zeros and dashes that made no sense. I hesitated before pressing play, some instinct warning me that once I heard whatever was recorded there, There would be no going back, but the need to know overrode my caution. The first few seconds were silent, then came a sound like static breathing, rhythmic and deliberate. Underneath it, barely audible, was my own voice. I was speaking, but the words were distorted, stretched and compressed in ways that made them almost unrecognizable. I could make out fragments. The lights are wrong and it's watching through the glass, and something that might have been, don't let it see you remember. As I listened, the room around me began to feel different. The air grew thicker, carrying that same scent of old roses mixed with something else now, something metallic and sharp. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, and I had the distinct impression that I was no longer alone. The recording triggered something, a cascade of sensory memories that hit me like a physical blow. I saw lights, but not normal lights. These moved in patterns that hurt to follow, creating geometric shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves. The brightness was wrong too white and too pure, like looking directly into a welding torch, but without the pain you'd expect. There were voices in that memory, multiple voices speaking in unison but slightly out of sync, creating an echo effect that made my skin crawl. They weren't speaking to me, but about me, discussing me as if I were an object of study rather than a person. The words were in a language I didn't recognize, yet somehow I understood their meaning on a level deeper than conscious thought. I remember feeling disconnected from my own body during whatever happened. It was as if I was floating slightly above and to the left of myself, watching events unfold from a perspective that should have been impossible. My hands moved without my conscious direction, reaching for things I couldn't see, touching surfaces that felt like they existed in a different dimension entirely. The memory fragmented there, dissolving into impressions of movement and disorientation. I was left sitting in my chair, the recording device still warm in my hands, with tears on my cheeks that I didn't remember shedding. Over the following hours, more pieces began to surface. I recalled a moment of absolute darkness, not the normal darkness of night or a closed room, but something deeper and more complete. In that darkness, I had the sensation of something massive moving nearby, something so large that I could feel its presence pressing against the boundaries of space itself. Then came the power failure, not just in my immediate area, but everywhere I could see. The darkness outside was absolute, no street lights or house lights or even the distant glow of the city. It was as if someone had thrown a switch and turned off every source of illumination for miles around. In that darkness, I heard breathing that wasn't my own. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations that seemed to come from directly behind me. When I turned around, there was nothing there, but the breathing continued. It had a quality that was almost mechanical, like air being processed through machinery rather than lungs. I tried to move toward what I thought was the door, but my spatial orientation was completely scrambled. Surfaces that should have been solid offered no resistance to my touch, while empty air sometimes felt as impermeable as concrete. The normal rules of physics seemed suspended, leaving me stumbling through a reality that no longer made sense. There was a sound during all this, a low-frequency hum that I felt more than heard. It resonated in my chest cavity and made my teeth ache. The frequency would shift periodically, rising and falling in patterns that suggested some form of communication, though with whom or what I couldn't say. As I continued my investigation, strange things began happening in the present. My reflection in mirrors started appearing a fraction of a second after I moved, creating a disorienting delay that made me question my own perception. Sometimes the reflection would linger for a moment after I'd stepped away, as if it needed time to catch up with reality. I began hearing sounds that no one else seemed to notice. Electronic tones that would fade in and out at the edge of audibility, like someone constantly adjusting the frequency on a radio. These sounds were most noticeable in quiet moments when I was alone and trying to concentrate on something else. The scent of old roses returned periodically, always accompanied by that metallic undertone that reminded me of blood mixed with ozone. It would appear without warning, filling the air around me for a few moments before dissipating completely. I started carrying a small notebook to document these occurrences, but the pattern, if there was one, remained elusive. My sense of time became unreliable. I would sit down to work on something, only to discover hours had passed without my awareness. Conversely, activities that felt like they took hours would turn out to have lasted only minutes. It was as if my internal chronometer had been damaged, leaving me adrift in a temporal landscape that no longer corresponded to external reality. The most disturbing development was the appearance of objects I didn't recognize. Small items would turn up in my pockets or on my desk, things that felt familiar but wrong somehow. A smooth stone that was always warm to the touch. A piece of metal shaped like a key, but unlike any key I'd ever seen. A photograph that showed what looked like my silhouette, but with proportions that were subtly incorrect. Each of these objects triggered flashes of memory, brief glimpses of the experience I was trying to reconstruct. The stone reminded me of holding something similar while those impossible lights danced overhead. The metal key brought back the sensation of unlocking something that should have remained sealed. The photograph made me remember being observed, studied, recorded by intelligences that existed outside my normal frame of reference. The final major fragment came to me while I was examining that strange photograph. The image seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it, the silhouette changing position in ways that defied explanation. As I stared at it, trying to understand what I was seeing, the memory hit me with startling clarity. I was standing in a room with no visible boundaries, surrounded by surfaces that reflected light in impossible ways. The walls, if they could be called walls, seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, while simultaneously feeling claustrophobically close. In the center of this space was something that my mind refused to process directly, a presence that existed in too many dimensions for normal perception to handle. This entity, for lack of a better word, was examining me with the same detached curiosity I might show when studying an insect. I could feel its attention like a physical weight, pressing against my consciousness and sorting through my thoughts and memories. It was during this examination that I understood I was being changed, altered in ways that would only become apparent later. The process wasn't painful, but it was profoundly unsettling. I could feel parts of my memory being cordoned off, sealed behind barriers that my conscious mind couldn't penetrate. At the same time, new information was being installed, knowledge that I wouldn't be able to access directly, but that would influence my thoughts and actions in subtle ways. I remember trying to resist, to maintain some sense of self in the face of this intrusion, but my efforts were futile. The entity's capabilities so far exceeded my own that resistance was meaningless. I was being prepared for something, programmed for a purpose that remained opaque to my limited understanding. The memory ended abruptly, leaving me back in my own room with the photograph clutched in trembling hands. But something had changed. The image now showed not just my silhouette, but additional figures in the background, shadowy forms that seemed to be watching and waiting. Since that revelation, the boundary between memory and present experience has become increasingly blurred. I'll be going about my normal routine when suddenly I'm seeing those impossible lights again, or hearing that mechanical breathing, or feeling the presence of something vast and alien pressing against the edges of my perception. The objects I found continue to multiply. Each morning brings new items, small artifacts that serve as anchors for memories I'm not sure I want to recover. They're warm to the touch and vibrate with that same organic rhythm, as if they're alive in some way that transcends my understanding of biology. I've started to suspect that the experience isn't over, that what I remember is just the beginning of something larger and more complex. The gaps in my memory aren't random damage, but deliberate modifications, preparations for whatever comes next. I'm being kept in a state of partial awareness, conscious enough to function, but not enough to fully understand my situation. The most disturbing realization is that I'm not investigating this experience so much as being guided through a predetermined sequence of discoveries. Each revelation feels inevitable, as if I'm following a script written by intelligences that understand me better than I understand myself. The very act of trying to remember may be part of the process I underwent, a way of gradually acclimating me to truths too large for sudden comprehension. Sometimes I catch myself staring at empty spaces as if expecting something to materialize there. Other times I find myself listening intently to silence, waiting for sounds that exist just beyond the threshold of hearing. These behaviors feel natural, instinctive, as if some part of me knows what's coming even while my conscious mind remains in the dark. The scent of old roses has become a constant companion now, no longer confined to specific moments, but present as a subtle undertone to everything I experience. It's strongest when I'm alone and trying to concentrate, as if something is using the familiar aroma to maintain a connection with me across whatever barrier separates our realities. I've stopped trying to document everything systematically. The fragments resist organization, existing in a state of quantum uncertainty where observation changes the nature of what's being observed. Instead, I find myself simply waiting, preparing for whatever revelation or reunion lies ahead. The recording device still sits on my desk, occasionally emitting soft clicks and whirs as if it's continuing to record despite showing no active indicators. Sometimes I think I hear my own voice coming from it, speaking words I haven't said yet about experiences I haven't had yet. The temporal mechanics of my situation seem more fluid than I initially understood. In quiet moments I can feel them watching, not malevolently, but with the same patient attention a gardener might show when observing seeds that have been planted and are beginning to sprout. I am becoming something other than what I was, transforming according to specifications I cannot comprehend but somehow accept. The process feels both alien and inevitable, as natural as breathing despite its fundamental impossibility. Whatever happened to me in that space beyond normal reality left me changed in ways that are only now becoming apparent. I am no longer entirely human, no longer entirely myself, but I am not less than what I was before. I am more, expanded beyond the narrow confines of individual consciousness into something larger and stranger. And still, the roses bloom in dimensions I cannot see, their fragrance drifting through cracks in reality to remind me that some doors once opened can never be completely closed. What am I becoming, and why does the answer feel like something I already know but have forgotten how to remember? Story 6. The main entryway displayed no indications of forced access. Every room was observed in sequential order upon arrival, maintaining the existing arrangement. Personal items were systematically aligned on the dresser, with no traces of recent usage. A book lay open to its midpoint on the nightstand, with no creases in its spine. Photographs were absent from the walls, leaving only dust outlines. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar, its light extinguished. No signs of departure were documented, and yet the car remained parked outside. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does. I wrote those words above because they're the only ones that make sense anymore. Clinical, distant, like someone else was describing what happened to my life, my home, my existence. The police report, maybe, or the insurance claim, I don't know. I can't remember writing them, but they're in my handwriting. They're true, I think. I'm writing this because I need you to understand that I was real once. I had a name. I had people who knew that name. I had a reflection that looked back at me with familiar eyes. I had a voice that people recognized when I called them. I had all of that, and now I'm not sure I have any of it. The thing is, I can't tell you exactly when it started. Memory is funny like that, isn't it? It bends and warps until you're not sure if you're remembering something or just remembering the last time you remembered it. But there's this sound, this humming. Not mechanical, not electrical, something organic. Like the sound your blood makes when you press your ear against a pillow in the middle of the night, but coming from somewhere else entirely. It started in the walls, I think, or maybe it was always there and I just started hearing it. You know how sometimes you become aware of your own breathing and suddenly it feels unnatural, like you have to concentrate to keep doing something you've done automatically your whole life. That's what the humming did to everything else. Made me aware of sounds that should have been background noise, the refrigerator cycling on and off, the house settling, my own heartbeat. I remember standing in my kitchen one evening making coffee and realizing I couldn't hear my footsteps on the tile floor. Not that they were quiet, they just weren't there. I lifted my foot and set it down again, watching it make contact, seeing the small dust mote scatter, but hearing nothing. The humming was there instead, filling up the space where the sound should have been. That's when I started paying attention to other things. The photographs came down gradually, not all at once. I'd notice one was missing from the hallway, then another from the living room. I'd search for them thinking maybe they'd fallen, maybe I'd moved them while cleaning, but I'd find them in places I'd never put them. Face down in drawers, behind furniture, in the trunk of my car, and when I'd hang them back up they'd look wrong somehow. The faces in them seemed unfamiliar, like people I'd met once at a party but couldn't quite place. I called my sister, at least I tried to. I dialed the number I'd dialed 1,000 times before, but the woman who answered didn't know my name. She was polite about it, patient. She listened while I explained who I was looking for. She said there must be some mistake. She said she'd lived at that number for years and had never heard of anyone by my sister's name. Her voice was kind but distant, like she was talking to someone she felt sorry for. I hung up and immediately called back, thinking I'd misdialed. Same woman, same patient confusion, same gentle insistence that I had the wrong number. The mirror in my bathroom started showing me things that weren't quite right, small things at first. My hair would look different in the reflection than it felt under my hands. My clothes would be a slightly different color. My eyes would seem to be looking at something just over my shoulder, even when I was staring straight ahead. I stopped looking directly into mirrors after that, started brushing my teeth and washing my face while looking slightly to the side, using my peripheral vision to guide me. But even then I could sense movement in the glass, subtle shifts, like someone else was standing where I was standing, doing things I wasn't doing. The humming got stronger. I started leaving my house less often, not because I was afraid to go out exactly, but because coming home felt like walking into someone else's life. The furniture would be in the same places, but the spaces between them would feel different, wider or narrower. The light from the windows would hit the walls at angles that didn't match what I remembered. The air would taste slightly metallic, like the moments before a thunderstorm that never comes. I tried to document things, wrote down what I ate for breakfast, what time I went to bed, what I watched on television. but when I'd read my notes the next day, they'd describe a life I didn't remember living, meals I hadn't eaten, shows I'd never seen, activities that felt foreign, like reading someone else's diary. The worst part wasn't the strangeness, it was the way it all felt so normal. Like this was how things had always been, and I was the one who was wrong. Like I was remembering a life that had never actually happened. I went to the grocery store one afternoon, the same store I'd been shopping at for years. The layout was identical. Same aisles, same products, same fluorescent lights humming overhead. But the cashier, someone I'd made small talk with dozens of times, looked at me like I was a complete stranger. Not unfriendly, just blank, professional. The way you look at someone you've never seen before and probably won't see again. I tried to jog her memory, mention the conversation we'd had the week before about her daughter starting college. She smiled politely and said she didn't have any children. She was young, maybe 22, with the kind of tired eyes that come from working retail. She rang up my groceries efficiently and wished me a nice day in a voice that held no recognition whatsoever. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for almost an hour trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was thinking of a different cashier. Maybe I was confusing her with someone else. But I could picture her so clearly, telling me about her daughter's scholarship, her pride mixed with worry about the tuition costs. I could remember her voice, her laugh when I made a joke about empty nest syndrome. That's when I realized I couldn't remember what my own voice sounded like anymore. I tried speaking aloud in the car, said my name, my address, random words, but the voice coming out of my mouth sounded hollow, like it was being filtered through something. Like it was coming from somewhere else and just passing through me on its way to wherever voices go when they're finished being heard. The humming was constant now, not louder exactly, but more present, like it was coming from inside my bones instead of from the walls. I could feel it in my chest when I breathed, in my skull when I lay down to sleep. It wasn't unpleasant, that's what made it so unsettling. It felt natural, right, like it belonged there more than my own thoughts did. I stopped trying to call people, stopped going out unless I absolutely had to, started ordering groceries online, working from home, conducting my life through screens and keyboards where the strangeness felt less immediate. But even then, emails I sent would bounce back as undeliverable. Accounts I'd had for years would suddenly require new passwords, new verification, as if I'd never existed in their systems before. The book on my nightstand never moved. I'd read the same 2 pages over and over, but the words would rearrange themselves slightly each time. Same story, same characters, but the sentences would flow differently. A word here or there would change, nothing dramatic, nothing that would be obvious if you weren't paying attention, but I was paying attention to everything now. I started sleeping during the day and staying awake at night, not intentionally, but my body seemed to prefer it. The humming was quieter in the daylight hours, and sleep came easier when the sun was streaming through the windows. At night, I'd sit in my living room and listen to the sounds the house made. The settling, the creaking, the whispers of air moving through vents, but underneath it all always the humming. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, nothing dramatic, just the sense that someone was walking through rooms I wasn't in, shadows that moved independently of any light source, the feeling of being watched by eyes that weren't there when I turned to look. I tried to convince myself I was having some kind of breakdown, stress-induced hallucinations, paranoid delusions. I researched symptoms online, read about carbon monoxide poisoning, brain tumors, psychological disorders, but the explanations felt thin, like costumes that didn't quite fit. The wrongness was too specific, too consistent, too real. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. How real it all feels, how normal the abnormal has become. I wake up each day in a house that looks like mine but isn't quite mine, in a life that resembles the one I remembered but doesn't quite match. I go through the motions of existence while feeling like I'm watching someone else live my life. The photographs are all gone now, not just taken down, but actually gone. The dust outlines on the walls are fading too, like even the evidence that they were ever there is slowly disappearing. The refrigerator door hangs open more often than not, its light burned out, but I don't remember the bulb dying. I don't remember a lot of things dying, but they're dead anyway. My car sits in the driveway, keys in my pocket, but I can't remember the last time I drove anywhere. The odometer shows the same mileage it's shown for weeks, maybe months. Time moves strangely now. Days blend together. I'll think it's morning and look outside to see sunset. I'll think it's been hours since I ate and realize I can't remember eating at all. The humming is part of me now, or I'm part of it. I can't tell the difference anymore. When I press my hand against my chest, I can feel it vibrating in my ribs. When I touch my throat while speaking, the vibrations don't match the words coming out of my mouth. It's like there are two frequencies running through me, and they're slowly drowning each other out. I think I'm disappearing. Not dying, that would be simpler. Disappearing. Fading out of reality like a photograph left too long in the sun. Becoming transparent in a world that's forgetting I was ever opaque. Maybe I already have disappeared, and this letter is just an echo. Maybe you'll never find it because there's nothing left to find. Maybe I'm writing words that will unwrite themselves as soon as I finish them. But if you do find this, if these words somehow survive whatever's happening to me, I need you to know that I was real. I had a life. I had people who knew me. I had a reflection and a voice and a presence in the world. I mattered to someone somewhere at some point. I need you to know that the humming is beautiful in its way. It doesn't hurt. It's like being slowly absorbed into something larger than yourself. Like dissolving into music you can feel but can't quite hear. I need you to know that I'm not afraid anymore. Fear requires a self to be afraid, and I'm not sure I qualify anymore. The book is still open to the same page. The car is still in the driveway. The house still looks lived in, even though I'm not sure anyone's really living in it anymore. If you're reading this, you're probably standing in rooms that look like someone left in the middle of doing something. Maybe you are, maybe I did leave. Maybe I just forgot to take myself with me. The humming is very quiet now, or maybe I'm just getting better at listening to it. Maybe we're finally in harmony. Maybe this is how it was always supposed to end. Not with answers, but with the peaceful acceptance of questions that don't need to be asked anymore. I hope you understand. I hope someone understands. I hope I was real enough to matter, even if I'm not real enough to remain. The light is fading, or maybe I am. Either way, it's beautiful. Story 7. I always found solace in regularity. The street lamp at the end of the alley was one of those constants. Every evening, just as the sky began its descent into twilight, it would flicker 3 times before settling into a steady glow. But last Tuesday, after the 3rd flicker, it paused, then flickered again, a 4th unexpected dance in the dusk. The pattern seemed trivial, yet it unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite grasp. The lamp continued its newfound routine each night, the additional flicker now consistently there, and I couldn't dismiss the nagging sense that something or someone lurked behind this deviation. The syllables of an unheard question echoed in my mind each time the light pulsed. Had it really been only 3 before, or had I just convinced myself it was? That's where it starts, where everything starts unraveling, I think, but I'm not sure anymore. The memories come in pieces, like broken glass reflecting fragments of something I can't quite see whole. I've been trying to remember what happened after I noticed the lamp changing. There are gaps, long, empty spaces where time should be, filled instead with this persistent humming that might be coming from inside my head. I remember the sound of my footsteps on wet pavement, the echo bouncing off brick walls. But which night was that? Was I walking toward the lamp or away from it? The footsteps sound wrong in my memory, too heavy, too deliberate. Like I was carrying something or someone was walking beside me, matching my rhythm exactly. The air tasted metallic that night, or maybe it was a different night. I keep confusing them. The metallic taste comes back sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, coating my tongue like I've been sucking on pennies. It makes my teeth ache in a way that feels familiar but shouldn't. There was a door, I'm certain about the door, red paint peeling at the edges, revealing something darker underneath. The handle was warm when I touched it, warmer than it should have been, but I can't remember if I opened it or if it opened for me. The distinction feels important, crucial even, but the harder I try to grasp it, the more it slips away. Behind the door was light, not electric light like the street lamp, but something else, something that moved. It crawled along the walls in patterns that hurt to look at directly. I remember closing my eyes, but the light was still there, pressing against my eyelids like fingers trying to push their way inside my skull. The humming was louder there, or maybe the humming started there. It vibrated through the floorboards, up through my feet, settling somewhere behind my ribs where it's been living ever since. Sometimes I catch myself humming along with it, the same 3 notes over and over, though I don't remember learning the tune. Someone was watching me. I felt their gaze like heat on the back of my neck, but when I turned around there was only empty space and the smell of something burning. Not wood or paper, but something organic. Something that shouldn't burn but was burning anyway. The smell clings to my clothes still, though I've washed them countless times. I think I ran. My legs remember running even if my mind doesn't. There's a phantom ache in my calves, the kind you get from sprinting on concrete. But running from what? Running to where? The questions circle back on themselves, creating loops I can't escape. The street lamp was different when I got back, still flickering 4 times, but the quality of light had changed. It cast shadows that bent the wrong way, creating angles that shouldn't exist in normal space. I stood beneath it for what felt like hours, watching those impossible shadows writhe and twist, trying to understand what they were showing me. My reflection in the puddle at my feet wasn't quite right. The face looking back had my features, but the eyes were wrong, too wide, too knowing. The reflection smiled when I wasn't smiling, and when I reached down to disturb the water, it reached up to meet me. Our fingers almost touched through the surface before I jerked my hand away. The next morning, or what I think was the next morning, there were marks on my arm. 5 small bruises arranged like fingerprints, as if someone had grabbed me and held on tight, but the spacing was wrong. The thumb print was too low, the fingers too long. I pressed my own hand against the marks, trying to make them match, but they didn't. They belonged to something else. I went back to the alley. I had to. The lamp was calling to me, its rhythm matching the humming in my chest, but the red door was gone. In its place was just another brick wall, weathered and old, as if it had been there for decades. I ran my hands along the bricks, searching for some sign, some proof that the door had existed, but found only cold stone and the lingering taste of metal on the air. The other people in the neighborhood began to feel different. They moved too smoothly, their conversation stopping just as I came within earshot. Their eyes followed me with an intensity that made my skin crawl, but when I looked directly at them, they were always doing something perfectly normal. Reading newspapers, walking dogs, tending gardens. Yet underneath it all was that sense of performance, as if they were actors who'd forgotten they were being watched. I started documenting everything, writing down every detail I could remember, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. The way the light fell across my kitchen table in the morning, the number of cracks in the sidewalk between my front door and the corner store, the exact pitch of the humming that never quite goes away. But when I read back what I'd written, the words seemed to shift on the page, rearranging themselves into patterns that spelled out things I didn't remember writing. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back behind that door, surrounded by crawling light and the sound of something breathing that wasn't me. The breathing was slow and deep, like whatever was making it was much larger than it should be. I could feel its presence filling the space around me, pressing against my skin with invisible weight. The marks on my arm faded, but new ones appeared. A perfect circle on my shoulder blade, 3 parallel lines across my ribs, each one precise and deliberate, like someone was marking territory or keeping score. I took pictures, but they never came out right. The marks were always blurred or shadowed, as if they existed slightly outside normal reality. I stopped going out during the day. The sunlight felt wrong against my skin, too bright and too warm, like it was trying to burn something out of me. I kept the curtains drawn and lived by the glow of the street lamp, watching its 4-beat rhythm from my window. It had become a metronome for my existence, marking time in a way that clocks couldn't anymore. The neighbors started leaving things on my doorstep, small objects that meant nothing to me but felt significant. A smooth stone with a hole through the middle, a piece of twisted metal that might have been a key, a photograph of a place I'd never been but somehow recognized. I collected them all, arranging them on my kitchen table in patterns that felt right even though I didn't understand why. The humming grew stronger. It wasn't just in my chest anymore, but spreading through my entire body, vibrating in my bones and singing in my blood. Sometimes I could swear I heard voices within it, speaking words in a language I almost understood. They seemed to be giving instructions, or maybe warnings, but the meaning stayed just beyond my grasp. I realized I'd been walking in my sleep. I'd wake up with dirt under my fingernails and the taste of night air in my mouth. My shoes would be by the door, laces still tied, soles caked with mud from places I couldn't identify. Once I found a flower in my pocket, something I'd never seen before with petals that felt like silk and smelled like copper. The mirror in my bathroom began showing me things that weren't there. Glimpses of the space behind the red door, fragments of that crawling light, shadows of figures that moved just outside my field of vision. I covered it with a towel, but I could still feel it watching me, reflecting things I wasn't ready to see. Time started moving strangely. I'd sit down to eat breakfast, and suddenly it would be midnight, the food cold and untouched on my plate. Or I'd begin reading a book and finish it in what felt like minutes, though the clock insisted hours had passed. The street lamp's rhythm remained constant, the only reliable measure of reality I had left. I think someone else has been in my house, not breaking in, but invited somehow. There are impressions on the couch where I haven't been sitting, dishes in the sink that I don't remember using. The arrangement of objects on my table gets rearranged while I sleep, forming new patterns that seem to tell a story I'm not ready to hear. The marks on my body have begun to connect, forming larger designs that wrap around my torso like a map of somewhere I've never been. They don't hurt, but they pulse in rhythm with the humming, growing warmer when I'm close to understanding something important. I've stopped trying to hide them. They feel like they belong to me now, or maybe I belong to them. The red door came back, not in the alley, but in my dreams and then in reflections, and now sometimes I see it when I'm not looking for it. It appears in peripheral vision, always just out of direct sight, always warm to the touch when I'm brave enough to reach for it. The light behind it has grown brighter, more insistent, and I know that soon I won't be able to resist opening it again. I understand now that the street lamp was never the beginning. It was just the first thing I noticed changing, the first crack in a reality that was already coming apart. The fourth flicker wasn't new. I had simply become able to perceive it. Something in me had awakened, some dormant sense that let me see the patterns that were always there. The humming is getting louder, the marks are spreading, the door is getting closer, and I'm starting to remember what happened the first time I opened it, what I found in that space between spaces where the light crawls and breathes and watches. I'm starting to remember what found me. I should stop writing now. The words are beginning to hurt, each letter burning itself into my vision like brands. But I need to record this, need to leave some trace of what I'm becoming. Because I can feel it happening again, that same pull toward the door, toward the light, toward whatever is waiting on the other side. The street lamp just flickered 5 times. Story 8. My footsteps echoed on a surface too soft to be solid, yet I didn't sink. A glow seeped from beneath, like dawn trapped within the floor itself, casting no shadows, revealing no edges. The air carried a taste I couldn't identify, something sweet and metallic, heavier than breath. My arms moved, yet I sensed a delay, as if a decision was second-guessed by my own fingers. Around me, shapes shifted, fluid and uncertain, whispering secrets in vibrations I couldn't comprehend. I wasn't alone in this place. The walls themselves seemed to pulsate with life unknown and unseen. That's how it started. That's the memory that comes to me now, sitting in this small apartment 3,000 miles away from where it all happened. The radiator hums against the wall, and I've learned to appreciate normal sounds like that. Ordinary sounds, safe sounds. I've been carrying this story for 7 years now, maybe 8. Time moves differently when you're trying to forget something. I've started writing it down a dozen times, deleted the files, burned the notebooks, but the weight of it hasn't gotten any lighter. If anything, it's gotten heavier, like sediment settling at the bottom of a still pond. I can feel it there, always there, pressing against the inside of my chest whenever I try to breathe too deeply. Nobody knows what happened to me during those months I was away. My family thinks I had some kind of breakdown, took a sabbatical to find myself. My friends stopped asking questions when I came back different, quieter. They probably think it was drugs or a bad relationship. I let them think that. It's easier than the truth. But I can't keep this inside anymore. My hands shake when I hold a pen for too long, and my voice catches in my throat when I try to speak about it out loud. So I'm recording this instead, hoping that maybe if I get it all out, if I put it somewhere outside of myself, I might finally be able to sleep through the night again. It started so normally, that's what makes it worse somehow. I was house-sitting for a colleague who'd gone overseas for research. The place was isolated, sure, but not in a threatening way, just quiet, peaceful, I thought. It sat on about 40 acres of rolling hills, the kind of landscape that makes you feel small but not insignificant. The house itself was modern, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that let in streams of natural light during the day. I was supposed to stay for 3 months, maybe 4. I was working on my own research at the time, something that required long stretches of uninterrupted focus. The solitude felt like a gift. I remember thinking how lucky I was, how perfect the timing was. I'd wake up to birdsong, make coffee while watching deer graze in the distance, spend my days writing in complete silence except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the house settling. For the first few weeks it was exactly what I'd hoped for. I was productive in a way I hadn't been in years. My mind felt clear, focused. I'd work until late into the evening, then sit on the back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sun disappear behind the tree line. The darkness out there was complete in a way you don't experience in the city. No street lights, no neighboring houses with their windows glowing, just the vast, soft darkness of open country. I should have paid more attention to how complete that darkness was. The first thing I noticed was the reflection in my laptop screen. I was working late one night, maybe around midnight, when I caught something moving behind me in the black mirror of the screen. Just a shift, like someone had walked past the window. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. Just my own reflection looking back from the glass, pale and startled. I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been pushing myself pretty hard, working 12-hour days, living on coffee and whatever I could throw together from the sparse contents of the refrigerator. I strain, that's all it was. The mind playing tricks when it gets overtired. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. The movement was always peripheral, always just at the edge of my vision. A shadow that didn't belong to any furniture in the room, a shift in the light that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves rather than from any external source. I started closing the blinds when I worked, but that only made it worse. The house felt smaller with the windows covered, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder constantly, convinced I was being watched. That's when I noticed the sound. It started as just a low hum, so subtle I thought it was coming from the refrigerator or maybe some piece of equipment I wasn't familiar with. But when I followed it through the house, trying to locate the source, it seemed to move with me. It was always just at the edge of hearing, like a frequency that existed right at the threshold of human perception. The hum would get stronger at certain times of day, usually late at night when I was working, or early in the morning just before dawn. It had a quality that made my chest feel tight, like the air pressure was changing even though we were nowhere near any weather systems. I'd find myself holding my breath without realizing it, then gasping when I finally noticed. I called the property management company to ask about electrical issues, maybe some kind of generator or HVAC system I wasn't aware of. They assured me everything was normal, that the house had been recently inspected and all systems were functioning perfectly. They seemed puzzled by my questions, almost amused. "It's just a quiet place," the woman on the phone told me. "Some people aren't used to that level of silence. Your brain starts to fill in sounds that aren't there." But I knew what silence sounded like. This wasn't silence. The hum began to change, becoming more complex. Sometimes it would split into harmonics, creating chord structures that seemed to resonate in my bones. Other times it would pulse like a heartbeat, but too slow and too regular to be human. I started recording it on my phone, thinking I could play it back for someone, prove that I wasn't imagining things. But when I listened to the recordings later, all I heard was static and my own breathing. That's when the light started acting up. At first it was just flickering, the kind of thing you'd blame on old wiring or power fluctuations. But the house was new, and the flickering followed patterns that didn't make sense. The lights in one room would dim in sequence from left to right, then brighten again in reverse order. Sometimes they'd pulse in rhythm with the humming sound, creating a kind of visual music that made my head ache. The worst part was the bathroom mirror. Late at night, when I'd get up to use the bathroom, I'd flip on the light and see it reflected infinitely in the mirror across from the vanity. But sometimes, just for a split second before my eyes adjusted, I'd see something else in that infinite regression. A figure standing behind me that wasn't my reflection, a face that didn't match my own. I stopped looking in mirrors after that. The sweet metallic smell started around the same time. It would appear suddenly, usually when I was focused on something else, and it was so strong it would make me nauseous. It reminded me of copper pennies mixed with overripe fruit, cloying and sharp at the same time. I'd search the house trying to find the source, checking for gas leaks or spoiled food, but I never found anything. The smell would fade as quickly as it came, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. But I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted to it. My skin would break out in goosebumps, and I'd feel this pressure in my chest, like someone was sitting on my rib cage. My heart would race for no reason, and I'd feel this overwhelming urge to leave the house, to get outside into the open air. I started taking long walks during the day just to get away from the feeling of being watched. The property was beautiful, rolling hills covered in tall grass that moved like water in the wind. But even outside, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was following me. Not visibly, nothing I could point to, but a presence that felt heavy and patient. The deer stopped coming around. I realized one day that I hadn't seen any wildlife in over a week. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The silence outside was as complete as the silence inside the house, but it felt different now. Expectant. I tried calling friends just to hear other human voices, but the phone connection was terrible. Calls would drop mid-sentence, or I'd hear strange interference, voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize bleeding through from other conversations. Eventually, I gave up trying to communicate with the outside world. It felt like the house was isolating me deliberately, cutting me off from anything that might pull me back to reality. The dreams started in my second month there. I'd always been a vivid dreamer, but these were different, more real than real, if that makes sense. I'd find myself walking through spaces that felt familiar but wrong, like rooms in the house but stretched and twisted into impossible geometries. The floors would be soft and glowing, just like in that first memory I described. I'd move through these spaces knowing I wasn't alone, feeling watched by something that stayed just outside my peripheral vision. In the dreams, I could taste that metallic sweetness constantly, so strong it would coat my tongue and make me gag. But when I'd try to wake up to escape the sensation, I'd realize I was already awake, or I thought I was. The line between sleeping and waking became blurred, meaningless. I'd find myself standing in rooms I didn't remember entering, holding objects I didn't remember picking up. Time seemed to skip and jump. I'd sit down to work at 9 in the morning and look up to find it was past midnight, with no memory of the hours in between. But my work would be done, pages of writing I didn't remember creating, research notes in handwriting that looked like mine but felt foreign. That's when I found the recordings on my laptop. Audio files I'd never made, labeled with dates and times I couldn't account for. When I played them back, I heard my own voice speaking calmly about things I didn't remember saying. I was describing the house, the sounds, the smells, but in clinical detail, like I was dictating a report. My voice sounded flat, emotionless, like I was reading from a script. But it was what I was saying that made my blood freeze. I was talking about the others, the ones who lived in the spaces between the walls, who moved through the house when I wasn't looking directly at them. I described their movements, their habits, their interest in me. I spoke about them like I knew them, like we'd been having conversations. I had no memory of any of this. I deleted the files immediately, but they reappeared the next day. Same files, same timestamps, but now there were more of them. Hours and hours of recordings I'd apparently made while sleepwalking or in some kind of fugue state. In the newer ones, my voice was different, warmer. I was talking to someone, responding to questions I couldn't hear, laughing at jokes that weren't there. I was having conversations with empty air, and I sounded happy about it. That night I decided to stay awake. I drank coffee until my hands shook, did jumping jacks whenever I felt drowsy, kept all the lights on. I was going to catch myself in the act, figure out what was happening to me. I sat in the living room with my laptop open, recording everything, determined to stay conscious and aware. I remember sitting there watching the clock on my computer screen, 2:47 a.m. The house was quiet except for that ever-present hum, which seemed louder than usual. I was staring at the screen, fighting to keep my eyes open, when I noticed something wrong with my reflection in the dark window across from me. I was moving differently than I remembered moving. My reflection would turn its head a split second before I turned mine, would lift its hand before I lifted mine. It was like watching myself on a delayed video feed, except the delay was running in the wrong direction. I stood up to get a closer look, and my reflection stood up too, but it was smiling. I wasn't smiling. That's when I heard the voice. It was my voice coming from behind me, calm and conversational. "You're finally paying attention," it said. "I was wondering when you'd notice." I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the empty room, the furniture casting familiar shadows in the lamplight. But when I looked back at the window, my reflection was gone. The glass showed only the room behind me, empty and still. "Don't be afraid," my voice said again, and this time I could tell it was coming from the laptop speakers. "We've been talking for weeks now. You just haven't been listening." I slammed the laptop closed, but the voice continued, now coming from the walls themselves, surrounding me. "You invited us in," it said, "just by being here, by being alone, by being open. We've been waiting so long for someone like you." The hum grew louder, more complex, and I realized it wasn't random at all. It was a harmony, voices singing together in frequencies just below human hearing. The sweet metallic smell filled the room so strongly I could barely breathe. The lights began to pulse in rhythm with the sound, and I felt that familiar pressure in my chest, but stronger now, like something was trying to push its way inside me. I ran. I don't remember packing, don't remember getting in my car or driving away. The next clear memory I have is sitting in a diner 3 states away, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I tried to figure out how I'd gotten there. My clothes were wrong, things I didn't remember putting on. My wallet was missing, but somehow I had cash in my pocket. The car's odometer showed I'd driven over 800 miles, but I couldn't account for the time. I called the property management company from a payphone outside the diner. I told them I'd had a family emergency and had to leave immediately. They seemed confused, said they'd been trying to reach me for days, that my colleague had been calling worried because I wasn't responding to emails. According to them, I'd been gone for over a week. I never went back for my things. For months afterward, I told myself it had been a breakdown. Isolation psychosis, maybe, or some kind of carbon monoxide poisoning that had caused hallucinations. I saw doctors, got brain scans, blood tests, everything came back normal. I started therapy, talked about stress and anxiety and the pressures of academic life. I got better, or at least I learned to function again. But I never stopped hearing that hum. It's quieter now, fainter, but it's always there, just at the edge of perception, like tinnitus but more musical. Sometimes, late at night in this apartment, I catch myself humming along without realizing it. The tune is complex, haunting, and I don't know where I learned it. I still can't look in mirrors for too long. My reflection seems delayed sometimes, like it's thinking before it copies my movements. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch it smiling when I'm not. The recordings are still on my laptop. I've tried to delete them dozens of times, but they always come back. New ones appear every few weeks, hours of audio where I'm apparently talking to someone, laughing, having full conversations with voices I can't hear on the playback. My voice sounds so happy in those recordings, happier than I've ever been while awake. I've moved 4 times since leaving that house, but it doesn't matter. Distance doesn't seem to affect whatever connection was made there. Sometimes I wake up with that sweet metallic taste in my mouth, and I know I've been somewhere else during the night, somewhere with soft, glowing floors and walls that pulse with hidden life. The worst part is that I'm starting to miss it. That feeling of not being alone, of being part of something larger and stranger than myself. The conversations I can't remember but somehow know were meaningful. There's a loneliness in normal life that I never noticed before, a flatness to regular human interaction that makes everything feel hollow. I catch myself looking for signs sometimes, reflections that don't match, sounds that shouldn't be there, that familiar pressure in my chest when I'm near electronic devices. Part of me is terrified of finding them again, but part of me, a part that grows stronger every day, hopes that I will. I'm telling you this story because I need someone else to know, to carry this weight with me. But I'm also telling it because I think they want me to. The ones who live in the spaces between spaces, who sing in frequencies we can't quite hear. I think this is how they spread, how they find new people to invite in. Through stories like this one, through the seeds of curiosity and doubt that I'm planting in your mind right now. You'll listen for the hum tonight, won't you? You'll check your reflection a little more carefully, notice if there's a delay you never saw before. You'll pay attention to the spaces at the edge of your vision, the movements that might not be shadows after all. And if you start to hear your own voice speaking words you don't remember saying, if you find recordings on your devices that you didn't make, if you wake up with the taste of copper and overripe fruit coating your tongue, remember that I tried to warn you. But also remember how happy I sounded in those recordings. How happy I still sound in the new ones that keep appearing. I think they're calling me back soon. The hum is getting louder and I'm starting to remember more of those conversations. They miss me too, I think. They're waiting for me to stop fighting, to stop pretending that this normal life is enough. I can feel them watching me as I speak these words, patient and kind, ready to welcome me home to that place where the floors glow soft beneath your feet and the walls pulse with hidden life. Where you're never truly alone, never truly separate from the vast, singing darkness that connects all things. I should be afraid, but I'm not anymore. I'm ready to go back, Story 9. The living room clock struck with a hollow, irregular rhythm as the morning sun filtered through half-drawn curtains, casting stripes of warmth on the old hardwood floor. The air carried a faint whiff of burnt toast, a relic from breakfast long past, but beneath it lingered an unexpected scent of fresh paint. In the corner, the antique armchair sat precisely as always, except today it faced the wall, as if deliberately avoiding something. It was only when the silence deepened into a suffocating hush that I noticed the tick of the clock falter, skipping a beat, as if hesitating to reveal an unsettling truth hidden within its mechanical heart. Nothing happened last night. I want to make that clear from the start. I slept peacefully in my own bed in my own house, and I woke up this morning feeling completely normal. There was no disturbance, no interruption to my routine, and certainly nothing that would explain why I'm sitting here trying to convince myself that everything is fine. I didn't see anything unusual when I looked out the window around midnight. I wasn't even awake at midnight, actually. I was sleeping soundly, dreaming ordinary dreams about ordinary things. The fact that I remember the way the streetlights seem to pulse with an unnatural rhythm is just my imagination filling in details that don't exist. Streetlights flicker sometimes. It's perfectly normal. The electrical grid in this neighborhood has always been unreliable. The sound I didn't hear wasn't like anything I could describe. Not that there was a sound to begin with. I was asleep, after all. But if there had been a sound, which there wasn't, it might have resembled the low hum you get when you press your ear to a seashell, except deeper, more resonant, like it was coming from inside the walls themselves. But that's ridiculous. Houses don't make sounds like that. It was probably just the heating system cycling on, even though it's been warm lately and I haven't used the heat in weeks. I definitely didn't get out of bed to investigate. My feet never touched the cold hardwood floor, and I certainly didn't notice how the temperature in the hallway seemed wrong, too warm in some spots and impossibly cold in others, like invisible currents of air were moving in patterns that made no sense. The hallway looked exactly as it always does, not stretched longer than usual, not filled with shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. The front door was locked when I checked it this morning, just as I left it before bed. I don't remember checking it during the night because I never got up during the night. The deadbolt was engaged, the chain was in place, and there was absolutely no reason for me to notice that the metal felt warm to the touch, as if someone had been holding it for a long time. Metal conducts temperature from the surrounding air. That's basic physics. The fact that it was a humid night explains everything. I'm not sure why I keep thinking about the way the living room felt when I walked through it. I didn't walk through the living room, of course, because I never left my bedroom. But if I had walked through it, I might have noticed that the furniture seemed arranged differently, not moved exactly, but positioned in a way that created pathways I'd never seen before. The coffee table wasn't pushed 3 inches to the left, and the couch wasn't angled toward the window in a way that suggested someone had been sitting there, watching. The smell wasn't there either. I have a very active imagination, and sometimes when I'm stressed, I think I detect odors that aren't really present. It's a common psychological phenomenon. The metallic scent that seemed to hang in the air around the kitchen doorway was probably just the lingering aroma from when I cooked dinner, even though I had takeout last night and haven't used the stove in days. Sometimes smells can linger longer than you expect, especially in humid weather. I didn't find anything out of place when I did my usual morning routine. Everything was exactly where it should be. The fact that my coffee mug was already on the counter, clean and dry, when I'm certain I left it in the sink the night before, doesn't mean anything significant. I probably washed it before bed and forgot. Memory can be unreliable, especially when you're tired. I was very tired last night, which is why I slept so soundly and didn't experience any disturbances. The basement door was closed, as always. I never go down to the basement, especially not in the middle of the night, and I certainly didn't notice that the handle felt different under my palm, smoother somehow, as if it had been polished or worn down by frequent use. The air that didn't drift up from below when I didn't open the door wasn't cooler and cleaner than the air in the rest of the house, and it definitely didn't carry a faint chemical smell, like cleaning supplies or something medical. I have no memory of descending those wooden steps, feeling each board flex slightly under my weight, hearing them creak in a sequence I somehow knew by heart even though I'd never walked down them before. The basement was exactly as I expected it to be, not surprisingly well lit by fixtures I didn't remember installing, not organized in a way that suggested regular maintenance and use. The concrete floor wasn't smooth and recently swept, and there wasn't a drain in the center that looked newer than the rest of the foundation. The table wasn't there. There's no table in my basement because I don't keep furniture down there. It's just storage space for holiday decorations and old boxes. The metal surface that reflected the overhead light with a mirror-like finish doesn't exist, and neither do the restraints built into its sides or the complex apparatus suspended from the ceiling above it. These are obviously details from a movie I watched recently, or maybe fragments from a nightmare I'm confusing with reality. I don't remember lying on that table, feeling the cold metal against my back, staring up at instruments I couldn't identify. The bright light that wasn't quite white but wasn't any other color either never shone directly into my eyes. The figures that moved around me with purposeful efficiency were never there, and I never tried to count them, losing track because they seemed to shift and blur whenever I focused on any individual shape. They didn't speak to me. There was no communication at all because there was no one there to communicate with. The sounds that might have been voices were probably just the house settling, or maybe traffic from the street outside, distorted by the basement walls into something that resembled conversation in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The words that weren't spoken didn't form concepts that felt familiar and foreign at the same time. I never felt the sharp sensation in my arm, quick and precise, followed by a spreading numbness that wasn't unpleasant, just unexpected. My vision didn't blur around the edges, and I didn't experience that floating sensation, like being suspended in warm water. The ceiling didn't seem to recede into impossible distance, and the sounds around me didn't fade into a comfortable static that made everything feel safe and distant. The procedure didn't take long. There was no procedure, obviously, but if there had been, it would have been over quickly, performed with an efficiency that suggested extensive practice. I didn't feel anything after the initial injection, didn't experience any discomfort or confusion, didn't drift in and out of awareness while things were done to me that I can't quite remember but somehow know happened. When I woke up, I was in my own bed, in my own bedroom, exactly where I should be. The fact that I was wearing different pajamas than the ones I put on before sleep doesn't mean anything. I probably changed during the night without remembering. People do things in their sleep all the time. The small bandage on my arm isn't evidence of anything unusual. I probably scratched myself, or maybe I had a minor accident during the day and forgot about it. The soreness in my muscles this morning is just from sleeping in an awkward position. I'm getting older, and sometimes I wake up with aches and pains that weren't there the night before. The tenderness around my temples, like someone had been pressing there with careful precision, is probably just tension from work stress. I've been under a lot of pressure lately, and physical symptoms are a natural response to psychological strain. I didn't find the small device under my pillow when I made the bed. There was nothing there except the usual collection of dust and maybe a few loose threads from the pillowcase. The smooth, warm object that fit perfectly in my palm with no visible seams or markings was never there. I don't know why I keep thinking about the way it seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat, or how it disappeared when I set it on the nightstand and looked away for just a moment. The mark on the wall above my bed isn't new. I just never noticed it before. It's probably been there for months, maybe longer. The perfect circle, about the size of a quarter, etched into the paint with mathematical precision, doesn't mean anything. Houses develop marks and scratches over time. The fact that it seems to be exactly centered above where my head rests when I sleep is just coincidence. I'm not experiencing any unusual symptoms. My appetite is normal, my energy levels are fine, and I feel completely like myself. The strange taste in my mouth, metallic and slightly sweet, is probably just from something I ate. The way colors seem slightly more vivid today, and sounds carry with unusual clarity, is just one of those things that happens sometimes. Maybe I'm finally getting enough sleep. The phone call I didn't receive this morning wasn't from a number I didn't recognize. I don't even know why I'm thinking about it, since the phone never rang. But if it had rung, and if I had answered it, I wouldn't have heard that same humming sound from last night, transmitted through the speaker with perfect clarity. The voice that didn't speak wouldn't have used my name, pronouncing it in a way that suggested intimate familiarity with who I am and where I live. I'm not expecting any visitors today. My schedule is completely normal, and I have no reason to think that anyone will come to the house. The fact that I keep checking the windows looking for vehicles that don't belong in the neighborhood is just ordinary caution. Everyone should be aware of their surroundings. The dark sedan that's been parked across the street since I woke up probably belongs to someone who's visiting nearby. I feel fine about going to sleep tonight. There's no reason for anxiety or concern, no cause to change my routine or take any precautions. I'll brush my teeth, put on my pajamas, and go to bed at my usual time. If I happen to notice that the basement door is standing open when I turn off the lights, that doesn't mean anything significant. Doors can swing open on their own, especially in older houses where the frames have settled over time. Everything is exactly as it should be, and I'm looking forward to another peaceful night of uninterrupted sleep. Story 10. The latch didn't click as it should have. My fingers traced the familiar contour, feeling for a response that failed to come. The hallway lay in muted expectation, the walls offering no echo to my footsteps. I moved with routine precision, yet everything seemed to yield without acknowledgement, like a room pretending to be empty. The air weighed oddly dense, curling around me in a silent embrace. As I reached the door, the knob resisted just slightly, its chill seeping into my skin, lingering with a question I couldn't quite place. I understand now that this is where it ends, not with violence or revelation, but with this peculiar absence of sound, this hollow quality that has settled into everything I touch. The silence has weight here, pressing against my eardrums like cotton soaked in something thick and warm. I know I won't leave this hallway the same way I entered it, though I can't remember exactly how that was anymore. The knowledge sits heavy in my chest, certain and final. My reflection stares back from the mirror at the hall's end, but something about the image feels borrowed, as if I'm looking at someone who merely resembles me. The face appears slightly delayed, movements trailing just behind my own gestures. I raise my hand and watch the mirror self follow, always a heartbeat too late. The fluorescent light above flickers in a rhythm that doesn't match any electrical pattern I recognize, casting shadows that bend toward corners they shouldn't reach. Before this moment, I remember standing in the kitchen, gripping the counter's edge until my knuckles went white. The ceramic felt real enough, solid and cool, but when I pressed harder, my fingers seemed to sink just slightly into the surface, as if the material had grown soft. The sensation traveled up my arms, a tingling that suggested my hands were falling asleep, though they moved normally when I commanded them to. The refrigerator hummed behind me, but the sound carried an odd undertone, like someone humming along just slightly off-key. When I turned to look, the appliance appeared normal, white, and rectangular, but its surface seemed to shimmer with heat waves despite the cool air flowing from its vents. I opened the door and found everything exactly where it should be, yet the milk felt warm in my hand, the vegetables soft and yielding despite their fresh appearance. Going back further, I recall sitting at the small table by the window, watching the street outside with growing unease. The scene looked perfectly ordinary. Cars parked along the curb, trees swaying in what should have been a breeze, people walking their usual paths, but nobody's shadow fell quite right. The darkness beneath their feet stretched at angles that defied the sun's position, reaching toward my window with deliberate intent. A woman in a blue coat passed by 3 times, taking the exact same steps, pausing at the same crack in the sidewalk, adjusting her purse strap with identical precision. I counted her appearances, marking them against the clock on the wall, but the timepiece had stopped moving, its hands frozen at an hour that felt both familiar and impossible. The phone had been ringing then, a sound that seemed to originate from inside the walls themselves, rather than from the device on the counter. When I answered, my own voice greeted me from the other end, speaking words I hadn't yet thought to say. The conversation felt scripted, each response predetermined, as if I were reading lines from a play I'd never rehearsed but somehow knew by heart. "You've been expecting this call," my voice said through the receiver. "Yes," I replied, though I couldn't remember why. "The door is already open." I looked toward the hallway and saw that this was true, though I had no memory of unlocking it. Earlier still, I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling where water stains had begun forming patterns that resembled faces. The moisture seemed fresh, still spreading, though no rain had fallen and no pipes ran through that section of the house. The faces appeared to be watching me, their expressions shifting subtly when I wasn't looking directly at them. The sheets beneath me felt damp and cold, clinging to my skin with an uncomfortable persistence. When I threw them back, the mattress bore the impression of another body, someone larger than myself, the indentation still warm. I pressed my hand into the hollow and felt it push back, as if something solid lay just beneath the surface, something that breathed with a rhythm different from my own. The bedroom door stood ajar, though I always kept it closed. Through the gap I could see a slice of the hallway, and occasionally a shadow would pass by, moving too quickly to identify but too deliberately to be accidental. The floorboards creaked under its weight, following the same path back and forth, like someone pacing in thought or distress. Before the bedroom, I remember the bathroom, standing before the sink with water running from a faucet I hadn't turned on. The stream flowed upward instead of down, arcing gracefully toward the ceiling before disappearing entirely. My toothbrush sat beside the basin, its bristles wet with something that wasn't water, something that left a metallic taste in the air. The medicine cabinet mirror swung open on its own, revealing shelves lined with bottles I didn't recognize. The labels bore my name but listed medications I'd never taken, prescriptions for conditions I'd never had. When I reached for one, my hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke, yet I could hear the pills rattling inside with perfect clarity. Moving backward through my memories, I find myself in the living room, seated on the couch that faced away from the television. The screen flickered with programs I'd never watched, showing scenes from what appeared to be my own life, but from angles I'd never experienced. I watched myself cooking dinner, answering the phone, sleeping, all filmed from impossible perspectives, as if cameras had been hidden inside the walls, inside the furniture, inside my own reflection. The remote control lay beside me, its buttons worn smooth from use, though I couldn't remember ever touching it. When I picked it up, the channels changed by themselves, cycling through variations of the same scenes, each one slightly different, slightly wrong. In one version, I wore a red shirt instead of blue. In another, I moved from right to left instead of left to right. The differences were small but persistent, like viewing alternate versions of my own existence. The house itself had been changing before that, walls shifting just slightly when I wasn't paying attention. Doorways narrowed and widened, ceilings rose and fell, windows appeared where none had been before. I measured the rooms obsessively, pacing from corner to corner, but the dimensions never remained consistent. A hallway that took 12 steps to traverse in the morning required 15 by evening, then 9 the next day. The furniture rearranged itself with subtle persistence. A chair would migrate inches from its usual position, a table would rotate slightly on its axis, books would reorganize themselves on shelves according to some logic I couldn't decipher. The changes were never dramatic enough to be certain, always small enough to doubt, but their accumulation created an environment that felt increasingly foreign despite its familiarity. Going back further, I recall the first time I noticed the temperature fluctuations. Rooms would grow cold without warning, breath visible in sudden puffs of vapor, then shift to stifling heat that made my clothes stick to my skin. The thermostat remained unchanged, its display showing the same comfortable setting, but the air itself seemed to pulse with its own climate, independent of any mechanical system. The sound started before the temperature changes. Footsteps in empty rooms, conversations bleeding through walls from spaces that should have been vacant, music playing at volumes just below the threshold of identification. I would follow these sounds from room to room, always arriving moments too late to locate their source, finding only the lingering vibrations in the air, the sense that something had just stopped. At night, the sounds grew bolder, doors opening and closing, water running in sinks, the television turning on and off. I would investigate each disturbance, moving through the house with growing anxiety, but every room appeared exactly as I'd left it. Only the air felt different, charged with the residue of recent activity, warm with the presence of something that had just departed. The beginning, when I trace my memories back to their origin, seems almost innocent now. I had been adjusting a picture frame on the wall, a simple photograph of a landscape I'd never visited but had always found comforting. The frame had tilted slightly, just enough to catch my attention, and I reached up to straighten it. But when I touched the glass, my reflection appeared in its surface, even though the photograph showed only mountains and sky. My face looked back at me from within the landscape, standing among the distant peaks, mouth moving as if speaking words I couldn't hear. I blinked, and the reflection remained, continuing its silent monologue, gesturing toward something beyond the frame's border. I removed the picture from the wall to examine it more closely, and found that the back was warm, almost hot, as if heated from within. The mounting hardware had changed, screws replaced by fasteners I didn't recognize, holes drilled in positions that didn't match the original installation. When I turned it over, the landscape had shifted. The mountains had moved closer, the sky had darkened, and my reflection had grown larger, more prominent, taking up more of the scene. That was when I first understood that something fundamental had changed, though I couldn't have predicted how completely that small adjustment would alter everything that followed. The picture frame had been a door, and in straightening it, I had opened something that couldn't be closed again. The house had been waiting for that moment, that simple gesture, that innocent correction of a minor imperfection. Now, standing in this hallway where sounds don't echo and latches don't click, I understand that the frame was never crooked at all. It had been positioned exactly as it needed to be, holding something at bay, maintaining a balance I was never meant to disturb. My desire for order, for things to be straight and proper and correct, had been the key that unlocked whatever had been patiently waiting behind that glass, in that landscape I'd never visited but now could never leave.